A respected science show, Nova, faced the challenge of convincing the public that the impossible was actually the only possible explanation. To do this, it was first necessary to describe the steel supports in the towers as thinner and weaker than they actually were.
But the tall vertical columns of the inner core and the outer walls were like freestanding stilts, until Robertson tied them together with floor trusses.
The next step was to create a pancake collapse simulation. Since this is impossible using the laws of science, it was first necessary to remove the outer wall supports that carry 40% of the tower's weight. Since office fires would have negligible effect on the steel structure, it was also necessary to remove all floor connections with the internal support structure. Finally, the simulation would run. But will 110 floors really collapse like pancakes in 10 seconds? Let's time it to find out. The first floor to collapse took 1.5 seconds to fall 12 feet. The second floor was faster at 1 second for a total of 2.5 seconds. As the gravity collapse starts to speed up, ignoring the hundreds of internal and external welded connections supporting each floor, we see 10 floors have collapsed after 6 seconds. This clearly indicates that the official pancake collapse theory cannot begin to explain how the buildings fell in just 10 seconds, and is so unreasonable that it should be immediately rejected out of common sense. Yet it has become the conventional wisdom of the day, and we must all pause and ask ourselves how this could have come about. Our heartfelt condolences go out to the relatives and our prayers to the victims in the towers. Victims like Edna Cintron, who was in her office working in the North Tower on the morning of 9/11. This photo of Edna appeared in the official FEMA report analyzing the damage to the North Tower. She bravely climbed through the debris at the impact zone to wave to news helicopters and let them know that the fires had gone out and the survivors were awaiting rescue. Perhaps she believed that the worst was over and that firefighters would soon arrive. After all, steel frame buildings have never collapsed anywhere in the world before 9/11. Yet on this day, 3 steel frame structures would free fall at the speed of gravity, normally only possible with demolition explosives that take months of preparation. As the official reports state, the jet fuel would have burned away within minutes, and we can see that indeed the fire looks like it is going out on its own. An accompanying diagram illustrates the interlocking steel grid that made up the outer framework of the towers.
I believe that the building probably could sustain multiple impacts of jetliners because this structure is like the mosquito netting on your screen door, this intense grid, and the jet plane is just a pencil puncturing that screen netting. It really does nothing to the screen netting.
Fortunately, to silence any skeptics, Edna was photographed from several angles and even videotaped and aired on CBS television. However, Edna's story is one that the architects of 9/11 do not want told to the public, because it causes people to disregard the unrealistic concept of the steel frame towers being weakened by office fires and collapsing like a house of cards. In reality, the towers were so strong that massive explosions were required to shatter the steel framework into pieces. If we look at the debris surrounding the World Trade Center, we find a snowfall of fine dust and intact pieces of paper scattered everywhere. If fires were responsible for the collapses, why didn't the papers burn or get shredded to pieces in the pancake collapse? Instead, we see white sheets of paper floating on a cushion of hot air in front of a pyroclastic flow of dust and debris through the streets. Paper and powder. How could it be possible? It appears that the high strength-to-weight ratio of paper allowed it to survive the energy blast that vaporized all heavy and denser materials. From within the shadows, we can see a bright explosive flash, and if we rewind the tape, a countless series of explosive flashes reveal themselves as responsible for the complete destruction of the inner steel framework. Simple visual evidence is perhaps the best place to start. This genuine building collapse due to an earthquake doesn't resemble the World Trade Center at all. Notice how the cars are crushed but otherwise intact. At the World Trade Center, cars parked nearby were turned into charred wrecks by an intense blast of heat, but were not crushed by falling debris. Could traditional demolition explosives produce this blast of intense heat? Clearly, a very powerful energy source was required. Our darkest suspicions have been confirmed by a military expert in Finland who has published several articles on this website showing international support for the victims in New York City. No other mechanism can explain the observed result of pulverized concrete and vaporized steel. On the right, we see a hydrogen bomb test and can instantly recognize the similarities to the World Trade Center. This is the awful truth that Fahrenheit 9/11 wasn't allowed to show you in a theater. Here we can see the firework explosions that the 1010 Winds news reporter spoke of within the collapsing debris. A rapid series of bright flashes are visible, indicating the destruction of the heavy steel in the internal framework.
There was pieces of their desks and pieces of the photos on their desks.
Could conventional demolition explosives vaporize all the people, computers, and office furniture in the towers, while pulverizing all the concrete in the floors into fine powder, and have enough left over to fracture the welded steel framework of up to 4-inch thick steel beams?
Trudging through this snow-like substance.
Our paper powder theory has been recognized as evidence of a thermonuclear device being detonated in the basements of both towers and World Trade 7 in order to superheat all the steel and concrete and sufficiently weaken the structure to facilitate the observed progressive collapses.
There was a schoolyard across the street, and I remember there were kids that were being evacuated from the schoolyard. And one of the girls looked up into the sky and she said to her father, "Daddy, look, they're doing it on purpose."
After a 3-year-long court battle, part of the firefighter and emergency worker eyewitness testimony was finally released to the public. Here are some excerpts that are confirmed by Rick's original video containing multiple explosions prior to the collapse of both towers.
We know our government can lie to us. Why isn't this a lie?